Okay, at 6 p.m. I'll call the meeting to order. Start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have roll call, please, Maureen.
Mrs. Head?
Here.
Mrs. Medina? Here. Mr. Cranes?
Here.
Mrs. Rayo?
Here.
Mr. Bembo?
Here.
Thank you, Maureen. We'll start out with approval of the minutes.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the regular Board of Education meeting minutes of April 13th, 2020, special open and closed session Board of Education meeting minutes of April 13th, 2020, and the Board reorganizational meeting minutes of April 27th, 2020.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the regular Board of Education meeting minutes of April 13th, the special Board of Education open and closed meeting minutes of April 13th, and the Board reorganization meeting of April 27th. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Those minutes are approved. Do we have any comments from citizens at all tonight, Maureen?
None.
Okay, thank you. Move into committee reports. We'll start with Ed Services. We have tonight, Greg.
Well, thankfully, it's not a ton that's new, and I will not go into any great detail because of that fact unless you have some questions for us. So annually, you'll see the peer and review mentor grant appear. That is on the docket for approval this evening. One difference is, unless I'm mistaken, I believe we're only working with Port Edwards moving into next year. I think Nakusa dropped out, engaging in some other kind of activities for their peer mentoring opportunities. So it will be just Port Edwards and WRPS, and that approach to get the grant and our approach to do the peer review mentoring approach is no different than it really was in the past. There may be some slight modifications to what that content is, but by and large, this is the same thing you've heard of for the last several years.
Okay, I make a motion to approve the application for the peer review and mentor grant in the amount of $25,000 for the 2020-2021 school year.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the application for the peer review and mentor grant in the amount of $25,000 for the 2020-2021 school year. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we have the professional development plan.
Yeah, and as Roxy points out here in the background information, this took a little bit of a different path because we started talking about this prior to the closure, but the wrap up around it and circulating amongst a number of different committees didn't transpire till, let's say, in the midst of the closure or over the last handful of weeks. Nonetheless, individuals were, opinions were solicited and so forth, and a major driving force behind the PD plan, of course, is our administrative team. There are some slight modifications to that PD plan. Nothing for you folks that you would be like, oh my God, this is drastically different than we've done in the past. But swapping a little bit of time at the request of staff, which came by virtue of the request from administration, to have a little bit more building time or more appropriately, I would argue, PLC time. So teacher, colleague to colleague conversation around helping kids. And so there's been some modifications and changes to incorporate more of that. We released a little bit of district time. So think of a broad gathering with a speaker, for example, for a morning. And I don't believe our plan moving next year at all will be to bring in a high dollar speaker of any sort. We're going to change and shift gears a little bit and look more at application and accomplishing things we've got in the hopper as Roxy acclimates to the new position. And frankly, part of her transition, our transition plans were a bit compromised with this closure to come this spring because there'd be some meetings we could have where some preliminary questions could be asked and some feedback solicited, but we'll that's in process, but I would argue not the same as it is sitting kind of face to face with people. And that will be brought forward and cast forward to next year. It doesn't put us at any disadvantage because that was part of the plan anyway. We're not looking at large scale changes because what we've got going is quite good. But with a new individual in that director position, it does make sense to be a little bit evaluative, look at what we got going, what do we want to do more of, what do we want to do less of, and have those conversations with individual committees, as well as reviewing the relevance of those committees. That's not outlined necessarily in the PD plan, but those conversations had a somewhat of an impact in what this looked like and how it unfolded. And it's described for you there in the attachment. And as I indicated, there's nothing to you folks or even to staff that they're going to look at and go, oh my God, this is totally different than in the past. it's fairly similar, just with a few modifications.
I'd make a motion for the approval of the 2020-2021 professional development plan is set out in attachment A.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the 2021 professional development plan. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, next item, proposed professional development day schedule.
And I threw some of that conversation into my prior conversation there too. We're looking at accomplishing, more about accomplishing the things that we've got going on. When I say accomplishing, focusing on practical applications in the classroom and tools for teachers to use directly with regard to a lot of these goals that we have outlined. To draw your attention back to the prior conversation too, I neglected to mention one of the pieces of commentary that came from the board was concern around caregiver capacity, which is kind of, shall we say, vernacular for those in education circles for stress and professional or teacher, school employee fatigue. I think that brings together a whole new slice of that commentary given our current circumstance. And that will be, there's aspects of that under the term called caregiver capacity that are implemented as part of our PD plan and are also included in activities and goals around what the PD days look like. So I neglected to mention that. That's something that's a little bit different, but came as a result of some of the conversation and commentary we had here at the board level following last year's January convention. But the day structure, I alluded to in my prior conversation as well, which is, by and large, you're not going to notice anything significantly different, but there was a little bit of flip-flopping with staff time and district time that took place. And our administrators absolutely had commentary and conversation about the approach at both the secondary and the elementary level with regard to those days.
I'll make a motion to approve the proposed professional development day schedule for the 2020-2021 school year.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the proposed professional development day schedule for the 2020-2021 school year. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item, modifications to the LHS planner. Agenda planner.
Yep, and so the changes are indicated there for you in italics and underlined. There's some new language around plagiarism. There's some modifications to a couple of different things, but by and large, there's not a significant amount of difference. They're changing discipline officers, if you notice on page 14. Ron seems to have a little shuffle each year as he refines with his new admin team what that looks like. So it outlines who's responsible for what grade level. And the approach that they're taking is to split the 9th grade up amongst the 3, and then each of the rest taking a specific grade level, 10, 11, or 12, which is a little bit different than what we've done in the past. We talked about, and we have included in, I'm jumping for where the page is. We'll get there. Page 22, just to point out, graduation ceremony. There's an expectation that they attend at least 90% of the school class periods in each and every term to participate in the graduation ceremony. That's one of the pieces to try to hold some of our seniors more accountable around school attendance during that final year. Frankly, school attendance and truancy, once you get to the age of about 17, there's a little less of the statutory obligation to kind of force behavior at that stage. So Ron and his staff look for carrots or other methods to get kids to come. By and large, it's not like kids turn to be seniors and then nobody comes to school, but it is just an extra thing to throw down there. And on page 26, I see it now, as you will see in all of the rest of the handbooks, so I'll only mention it now, suicide prevention resources and mental health resources that are available here locally in the county, and then of course some things that are geographic or nationwide as well.
Are we gonna have that number in the back of the IDs?
That's the plan. I've talked about it with Phil and Ron, and I believe that will be the case, yes. So we have, yeah, well, now it's a state law.
It's a law.
That's a great point.
So we have to.
It's not in my brain now, but we contract with the company that does the student IDs. And now it's gonna be quite a bit easier with statute because they'll be obligated to.
So what happens to ones like this, you get it your freshman year and it follows you for 4 years?
They get a new ID each year.
Oh, now they do?
Yep,
Oh, okay.
yep. they'll get them updated.
Okay, on page 15, number 4, the last bullet, that could change, could it not?
On page 15,
Page 15, number 4, the last bullet.
oh, number 4. Oh, yes,
Okay.
yes, it could,
Okay.
it could. If we have to come back to class with PPE and people wearing masks, then absolutely, that would be okay. Ironically, we've gotten several emails from companies that want to sell us
Masks.
masks that are logoed. So you'll have yeah. It's a sign of the times. And that's pretty much it.
You
I
want
make
to
a
go through them
motion-
all, or
Well, I can talk about them all if you would like.
then we'll just,
We have to make each one separate though, don't we?
yeah.
You do.
Boom, boom, boom.
Okay.
What he's basically saying is get all of my yapping out of the way on the
Yeah.
front end and then. As far as the RAMS modifications are concerned, the dates and times are stricken. Those will be included, their daily schedule will be included in a future iteration as they're still working out some of those kinks for what we had talked about. And in reviewing this, I don't believe there was a ton. And in fact, I'm inclined to think that there was not. And then moving on to the elementary handbook, one of the pieces, the only thing that and in the past, Maureen actually brought this up, but I don't believe you necessarily saw elementary handbook language back for the last several years.
We have not.
And you should, and that's why this copy is here for you. Tina Wallner spearheaded it for the elementary principals. They each do some kind of different minor modifications to what their handbook looks like for their building. But this is information that every elementary kid would get. And so you have the ability then to kind of understand what we're talking about. One piece that I noticed in review is on the last page, and of course they're not numbered, but it's the last page prior to attachment F. You'll see where it says video surveillance. About 2/3 of the way down the page, surveillance is spelled wrong. That's been corrected, but it's not in your handout, so that's been fixed.
Is there, I'm not seeing anything about the hotline in here.
The suicide and mental health.
Yeah.
I think the thought process around that was that, given it in the elementary climate, those kids are less likely to make those kind of contacts on their own, and that'd be followed up with some kind of a parent communication around what resources we have, rather than having it in an elementary.
But I'm not even seeing anything about it. I think to be consistent, we should have a blurb in here about it. Considering it's a state mandate for everything else.
Okay,
I mean, am I wrong? I would think, I mean, even the parents, so that the parents are aware of it? I guess I would like to see something in there, personally.
we can make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's consistent then
Right.
through all
No problem.
I noticed, we're looking at a September 1st start date. If things could go better and this COVID-19 subsides, is there a possibility of starting the school year earlier?
That's the claim at the state level, but there's two schools of thought, well, there's several schools of thought on that. And one of them is to determine the pros and cons and the advantages and disadvantages of starting early and whether that would exacerbate a circumstance that we don't want to exacerbate with regard to the pandemic. So that's topic A. Topic B is, does the modification of the calendar to start early buy you back enough to at the cost of what, the ramifications of the community, work schedules, and summer plans, and all these other things. So both of those things are kind of up in the air. It sounds as though would have the capability to do an early start. However, at this phase, my attitude around that would be don't. That if we can start on time in September, that would be the proper approach. Our staff are keenly aware, and we would be able to meet the kids where they're at to start the school year and then get them up to speed as we progress through the school year. So the logic around starting early would only be thinking that we could then maybe insulate ourselves from a potential closure later in the fall next year, as an example. So we come to school in August, things get really bad. Come September, the state shuts schools down again for October, November, and we really haven't missed as much time as if we would have started in September, kind of a thought process. If you're gonna start and it's gonna exacerbate the situation, it's gonna do so regardless of when you start. And,
It would also depend if we do something on summer school, seeing how that goes.
Correct. So we do have plans. We canceled June summer school. We do have plans to run two-week sessions, July 6th through the 17th or something like that. And then a week off, and then the 2 weeks following that, which bring us the last week of July and the first week of August. At this stage, based on a conversation we had with a state Department of Health Services representative, that's probably not gonna happen. But again, there's so much in the mix right now. So we're not in a position where we're unilaterally canceling that stuff either. We just met today regarding summer school. We're gonna meet again next week. What we're awaiting is the Supreme Court decision on whether the order is constitutional or whether it's lawful. And if we find that it is, then we'll make plans as appropriate. And if that's the case, the Badger bounce back with the phasing and so forth, we would be okay to do summer school if we're at phase 1, schools can open, but you'd still be at that 10-person, which really wouldn't be functional. But I think by phase 2, you might be able to run some kind of a potentially modified summer school. So yeah, we're monitoring that circumstance, as it were.
But even looking at schools, don't they talk about maintaining that social distance of 6 feet?
Yeah,
And we don't have individual desks anymore.
no. In addition, I think one of the biggest things in reading those, that CDC provided some draft guidelines around if you were to open school, here's what it would look like. And I've had some conversations with our administrative team. We have to honestly think whether or not it's even possible. So having 6 feet in between kids, now contemplate that in a kindergarten classroom, number one. Number two, the way that our buildings are structured, if you think about Rams or Lincoln High School, I mean, come on, you can't, you would have to do a staggered schedule and decrease the number of kids in the building at any one given time. That would be your only approach, in my opinion. The other thing they say is you gotta feed kids in classrooms and not bring them to a common area to eat, no visitors, no nothing, and basically.
That's impossible too.
Exactly, and you rotate teachers more than you rotate kids, so you keep kids in one classroom all day long. These are in these draft guidelines. In reading them, it's not really possible. It's not a thing. Now, if we were in California where the weather's gorgeous and our buildings are all facing the outside and, I can stand outside my classroom and meet a group of kids sitting in a field somewhere, it's much different than walking halls and traversing, our closed buildings like we have here in the Midwest. It might be possible, is I guess what my point is. But I just don't see this modified school approach being reasonable. And one of the arguments that's gonna immediately be made is if 50% of the kids or a quarter of the kids or whatever can come to school at any one time, why can't 100%? It doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? So if we were to break it up in order to establish social distancing, it would be a certain percentage of the kids that would be able to attend. Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday, it's A through, Q or S or whatever, and then the rest, it's whatever.
Well, and then you get into whether you have to require masks.
Okay, so I have a question, that, because at this point, we don't have the testing that needs to be done in order to make everybody feel secure with the whole situation, and even come September when classes would be starting again, there are gonna be parents who are gonna say, I don't want my kids there, especially with what's going on in New York now with all these kids getting some kind of a version of the COVID virus. That, are we gonna be able to offer, say, the teachers would be able to maybe online or whatever, broadcast their lectures or whatever, so that kids would have an option to stay home and learn if the parents don't want them to be exposed in the classroom like that?
Yes, we're gonna almost certainly have to do that. Provide options, absolutely. Yep. And I don't know if it'd be real time, like logging in and just being part of the class. but
Right,
you're
that's what I was
sitting there.
wondering, like if they could log in and like be in that class.
Yeah, that's one possibility, but I don't know if that would be the approach necessarily district-wide.
So along with Katie's question, I saw last week they were offering public testing at the county garage. You had to make an appointment, and then
If
they
you
said,
have symptoms.
Right.
they asked that you make an appointment if you had symptoms. So it sounds like testing is becoming a little bit more available.
Yes.
Is that something where we will
But-
require students to be tested before they can come
But how
back?
many tests?
I don't know, I
How
mean,
often?
are they gonna be available?
Because one day they can test positive.
Right now, it's just. if you
Exactly,
have
the one that was
symptoms.
the vice president, she's,
Right.
one day she's fine, the very next day she's positive.
Yeah.
So what's the test, you know?
It's a snapshot in history,
Yeah, one day.
and the incubation period is up to 14 days.
Yeah, well,
So,
yeah.
And we don't know if a
You could have
person
three
has had it, if
tests.
they can get it again.
Right,
Yeah.
correct.
there's so much unknown.
Yeah, there's, and that's the other piece too, that I think people are, when I say people, I'm speaking of my colleagues, but some folks are jumping the gun with regard to what our fall plans can be. And I don't wanna move down to me, it doesn't make sense, just move down the path and just say, okay, everything's canceled all summer, we're not gonna do anything. And then come September, you know, we'll not have school and everybody, whatever, I mean, my God, it could be totally different in 2 months from now, or it could be worse, could be better. Nobody really knows that aspect of it. And also to plan for every eventuality that could possibly come to pass would be like a dozen or more potentials. And that's just wasting people's time and energy on items that we really have no control over. So frankly, the best course of action, in my opinion, is that we base our decision-making off of what we're, legally and statutorily obligated to do. And we only know that when we get closer to the point in time when these things are gonna transpire. So the idea of, will we have to accommodate people that are worried and not wanna send their kids to school? Absolutely. I mean, there's no question in my mind, even if it's tomorrow, everything's back to normal, we'd still be in that boat. But does that mean that we have to limit attendance and that we have to provide PPE and that we have to, all of these questions that we have? Right now, we don't know the answer to that. I don't think any human being does. I'm inclined to think the answer is yes, but like I've said to the administrative team, I can't envision what this would look like if you were requiring half of Lincoln High School, for example, to go to school on Monday and Wednesday and every other Friday and the other half on Tuesday. I don't see what you gain.
Well, even bus,
You can't bus kids.
right,
How many, you gotta
Right,
what,
and even-
double the bus fleet if you're gonna do every other day?
right.
Or whatever the, anyway. Yeah, so I mean, the limitations around what an extended order into fall is gonna look like, well, nobody knows at this phase, but yeah,
What will transportation look like?
yeah,
If you have to have a 6-foot buffer between kids, not
Yeah.
even sure from row to row, if
Right.
barely would have that.
I'm gonna bring us back to agenda planners.
Wow.
yeah, this is the only time in my, I'm gonna say, almost in my life, where you have no ability to kind of critically and rationally think about a situation and develop some kind of contingency plans. You just, I mean, sure, there's possibilities, but again,
But they're all
And no-
dependent on everything is dependent on
Correct.
something else.
and no one can tell you. There's not an answer to the question at this stage. So,
I'm gonna make a motion for the approval of the proposed modifications to the LHS planner for the 2020-2021 school year.
Second.
We have a motion and second to approve the proposed modifications to the Lincoln High School planner for the 2020-2021 school year. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
Then I'll make a motion for the approval of the proposed modifications to the RAMS planner for the 2020-2021 school year.
Second.
We have a motion and second to approve the proposed modification to the RAMS planner for the 2020-2021 school year. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
And then thirdly, I'll make a motion for the proposed modifications with the addition of the suicide prevention blurb to the elementary school planner for the 2020-2021 school year.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second to approve the proposed modifications with the additional language around suicide prevention to the elementary school planner for the 2020-2021 school year. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Okay, and looks like updates, we got a couple.
yeah, the end of term progress reporting is provided for your information. Parents have this information already based on their school sending it out to them. I think the only one, K-8, what we're talking about really is progress monitoring or having parents some ability to track what kids are or aren't doing. Keep in mind, there are no academic ramifications. There are no accountability ramifications around a lack of completion for kids that are K-8 because of the hours of instruction waiver. And so there isn't really a backdrop to hold a kid accountable to turn an assignment in or assign them a grade in those courses. 9-12 is a little bit different, it being different primarily because of graduation requirements, in addition to some significant concern from certain students and parents, justifiably so, about GPA and what that means for graduation, what that means for applying to colleges and tech schools and blah, blah, blah. And so Lincoln has the option of maintaining your standard approach, so you get A, B, C, D, F, and it goes on your transcript and it counts to your class rank and everything else just like normal, although virtual, or let's call it off campus. Or students and parents can opt to do a pass/no credit choice, in which case it will be reported as a P on their report card and it does not impact their GPA. Now, you might say, why would you do that? And the reason behind that is there's not necessarily a level playing field for 100% of our students when they're not on campus receiving instruction. So some kids have limited or no internet access, so we have to figure out ways to meet their needs. And some kids, for example, may not be predisposed to learning in this virtual format to such a degree that they're comfortable with the grade they're going to get in this course, or is it necessarily indicative of their abilities? But given circumstance, here we are. So really it's about providing a suite of options. I had a call from Senator Teston's office today. The gentleman that spoke to me, one of his aides, indicated that, that's pretty unique. I don't think I've heard of other schools doing that. My response is it makes sense to do that way, because you don't have this then where you're disadvantaging one group or the other. All the smart kids with good internet access, you all get A's, everybody else, you're screwed. I mean, that would be one option. Or everybody's pass no credit, or pass fail, and it is what it is. Sorry, too bad. Whatever, 4.0 student or F student, a pass is a pass. You see where I'm going with that? And it sounds like so definitive, and I'm kind of making light of the situation, but really this menu of options and this suite of options for kids and families is the most rational approach. It's less than ideal. And that's the other thing that I shared with Senator Teston's aide. I don't think there's any school staff member that I talked to that looked at any of the things that we're doing in this environment and said, this is great, we should keep doing it this way. But we are doing the best that we can, and frankly, the outcomes and the information and the things that have transpired so far, as a massive credit to our staff, have gone very well. In fact, better than I had anticipated, but it just shows us day in and day out, week after week, the need to have in-person, face-to-face regular school, even in the 21st century. It still exists. And so missing out on that part is huge. Nonetheless, K-8, really just kind of mom and dad pay attention, make sure you know what your kid's doing, although there's not an impact academically speaking on that kid. 9-12, the options that were outlined for you.
So I know the K-8s, or especially the K-5s, are, there's packets they're picking up and things. Are those returned to the teachers looking them over to see if the children
Yes.
are?
Yeah, so the expectation is that feedback, and this is K-8 as well, that feedback is provided to the students so that they know, okay, I'm on the right track, or, yep, this makes sense, but not necessarily assigned a grade.
Okay.
And so they'll have some kind of marking system, it's described in there, whether it just be kind of a check, yep, I got it, or a P for a pass, or that sort of thing. And there's not going to be commentary around student achievement on our standards-based report card and standards, but there will be expectation that elementary teachers communicate in some narrative fashion kind of how that third try went. It might have been, you know what, you did great, given the circumstances, have a great summer. Could be as easy as that, or it could be a little bit more nuanced about the challenges that kid faced, given the circumstance, the things they did do or didn't do.
Have the K-5 been introducing new materials all along with the kids, or have they? Because I know at first it was going to be more like just like review stuff, because they didn't know if the parents would be able to help the kids.
So what was engaged in initially was, because when this started, myself included, we thought, okay, maybe a couple of weeks and we'll be right back at it. And then, very quickly that changed. So to answer your question, yes and yes. It's not as though it's new information every day and, it's like a fire hose and it's sink or swim, kids, too bad. And it's a combination of that. So elementary staff and administration went in and kind of said, okay, if you're a third grader, what are the things you absolutely gotta get out of third try math or third try ELA? And identified those, couple to 4 or 5 items. And there was some focus on those things. Would that be considered new content? Yes, to a degree, but with supports and ensuring that these are what we call a power standard or something that the kid's really gonna need. We also know what we have done and we haven't done, and we have an evaluative method to determine what kind of the beginning of next school year, when we get our hands on the kids again, what that's going to look like and the things we need to do to get fourth graders ready for fourth grade, because of course they didn't have third try during third grade and so forth and so on. And so it's a combination of factors. It's activities for, let's call it for fun or for family-based things. It's activities for skill building. It's activities for some of these anchor concepts that kids would need to have to reasonably move on.
Has there been an issue at all of families that are choosing not to participate? Like they just don't do the work or don't have their students participate?
And by an issue, do you mean, does that happen?
Yeah, like
Yes.
are people not choosing not to educate their kids?
Yes.
So do we have any repercussions for them, for that, or is there anything we can do to?
There can't be. Again, because of the hour of instruction waiver, there's no truancy that would be enforced, and there's really no ability for the district to say, oh, now you have an F and you have to repeat third grade. And reasonably, all of the data indicates that that kind of approach isn't really gonna help a kid anyhow. It's more about what we're gonna do when we're able to, work with the kid again in the future. But with that said, that aspect of customer service is, and we always do customer service, so when I say that, I don't mean to say that we try not to work with our parents, under normal circumstances, but that, became the forefront rather than this accountability piece to say, what do you need, right? And understanding that a parent might say, you know what, my husband and I both work 12 or 14 hours a day, and the last thing I'm gonna do when I get home is, 2 hours of work with my third grader who is bouncing off the walls and can't sit for 30 seconds. Okay, we get that. So now let's figure it out, let's partner and figure out what we can do. And so that might look different than the kid that's got a mom or dad that stays at home and they do their stuff first thing in the morning and they're done, by 11 o'clock and then they play and do whatever they do. And then you've got anything in between. So what it comes down to is that outreach and figuring out what engagement looks like. So does engagement mean I'm turning things in back to the teacher? Does engagement mean I'm reciprocating over the phone or via the internet or email or whatever the case may be? It's kind of re-envisioning what we mean by engagement. And I would argue we absolutely have more engagement and involvement than not. And I also wouldn't call it a pervasive attitude, like there's a big chunk of people that are just like, screw it, we're not gonna do anything. It's a relatively small proportion. And with those folks, what we've done is this outreach piece. So there's contacts by the social worker, by the teacher, by the principal. In some cases, we actually have asked law enforcement to do a well check because there's been absolutely no communicate, fall off the grid sort of stuff, right? And out of concern for the kids, like, hey, what's going on? There might be some follow-up. So I would just say it looks different.
I wouldn't think that the parents would necessarily just be negligent in saying, I don't feel like doing this, but I think it's gotta be overwhelming, especially if you've got kids in 3-4 different grades and you're, trying to help each and every one. I think a lot of parents could easily be overwhelmed with this.
Absolutely.
Besides financially.
Absolutely.
Right, everything, it's everything.
Absolutely.
Well, and don't you think with especially the elementary, the budget's we're not gonna have money, but we're gonna almost need extra help in those classrooms at some point.
That would be an extra body.
You're almost
6
gonna
feet
have-
away.
I just can't see, the teachers were overwhelmed the last couple of years when you went into a classroom with all,
Right, we have to think about, and this has been communicated and will continue to be communicated, that everybody's in the same boat. Doesn't make it okay, but this is a statewide / nationwide thing, number one. Number two, just like we do every year, and that doesn't mean that there's still some mental blocks and some things that some of our staff have to get over, which is, it really doesn't matter if you're the 4th grade teacher, if your kid's at this level, you gotta start there and go from there, right? And we've talked about that for years. That's not new to anybody in this room or in education, but there's a portion of our staff, and you know, whether it's a big portion or a little portion, it really doesn't matter. It's human nature to say, I'm behind, and we're in a crisis mode. And frankly, we're not in a crisis mode with regard to our kids and their brains. They're gonna be okay if we do the right things. If this is prolonged and goes on forever, I mean, that's a big problem. But we'll be able to get our kids back on track, but not at the cost of our staff members saying, now I gotta do extra
Right,
more.
and not even, I'm not even talking about the cost of our staff members, I'm talking about kids getting the material to get to the next grade.
Absolutely.
That's, you know, I mean, our staff is, I mean, they're always awesome and they're gonna step up, and this is, like, I agree, this is a total, but I think, for the kids, I think, you know,
But tying it all together, I mean, what we're doing, again, I don't think I haven't heard anybody sell it, like, oh yeah, this is great, this is the way it should be. It's stressful. It's stressful for the parents and their kids. It's stressful for the staff to have to deal with it. And it's just not an appropriate method for the things that we expect and what we want to see our kids do and be part of, you know? And people could say, well, yeah, it's the social part. Okay, yeah, but it's not as though 90% of our school day is just social activities. I mean, that's a good portion of what we do. I mean, we're a social being, a social species. But on the same hand, you add those two things together, and I got 3 kids myself, and there's days where it's like, good God, just go away, just go. And my kids are self-sufficient, they're old enough, right? And my wife and I even talked about, can you imagine, well, I have twins, so I mean, a couple of 6-year-olds and an 8-year-old running around, I mean, I can't even imagine. I cannot even imagine. It's brutal. And it's not because, again, parents are like, oh, I'm not gonna do it, I'm oversimplifying, but how do you do that? And some of the stuff that my kids have to do, and I'm a fairly smart guy, but on the same hand, I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. You know, in some advanced math course that some of my kids are in, I'm like, I don't know, you know, I don't have a clue. So my advice, well, let's look at Khan Academy or, you know, that kind of thing. And parents get that in this day and age. But what do you do if you got a 3rd grader that's struggling with a concept and you're not sure what that, you know what I'm saying? So this is being the only consolation of all of this stuff is that it's being played out everywhere.
and I guess that we
Everywhere.
just keep saying that to people.
Exactly, exactly. And I think it's going to behoove us to send the appropriate messaging. I think we have already, but we're gonna continue to do so, and that is relax. Because we'll get the kids back to where they need to be, and it'll be okay. It will be okay in the long run. I'm not gonna tell you when it'll be okay, but it'll be okay eventually.
I think one of the great things that'll come out of this is a greater appreciation for teachers.
Yeah.
You know,
I
that
hope
it's,
so.
oh, it's that easy job.
Oh, I hope so, I hope so.
And even
It
some
does
of
put
the
in
state
perspective.
testing that they mandate, I mean, maybe they'll take a look at that, and, you know, because, but yeah.
Why is the question there? Yeah.
B,
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So anyway, that was end of term progress reporting.
Okay. Looks like we got an update on student travel as well.
Yes, and it is self-explanatory there for you, just a reschedule.
Okay.
But at what point in time, if it wasn't still safe in October, would they have to make a decision that not to continue this?
That I do not know off the top of my head,
And I mean, there must be money has been put down and,
I would guess, yeah.
most
That
of
could
them are
even be
getting
something that's
refunded.
controlled by the theaters. You know, if the theaters can't open for shows, then they notify the customers that have the
you know, but if
tickets.
they're open and it's, oh, well,
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, I just,
There's a lot of refunds given.
well, the one in the Dells isn't refunding, Mount Olympus. They've canceled, you know, they're closed, people can't come and they're not
Yeah.
refunding the money,
I
so
saw
it's
that.
not automatic.
Oh,
Oh, really?
yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So they're not giving them like vouchers for future use, they're just,
No.
wow.
There was one other one, I think, someplace, so.
So, you know, it's just not automatic.
No, it isn't.
That's gonna hit their star rating.
Okay, it looks like that's it for debt services. We have a
Business
motion to
services
approve the
request
minutes.
There are no.
No, we don't need that?
Because we just approved each one.
All right, sorry. I'll get this one of these months.
Yeah, by that time, we'll be back to normal.
Let's
I
hope
hope
so.
you don't have to.
No
We
kidding.
move into business services. Looks like we have a purchase of elementary computer workstations.
Yep, again, they're self-explanatory. It's to replenish and replace supplies at a handful of elementary schools. And, yeah, there you go.
And to note that they're $248 a piece, which is a heck of a price, because I looked up before the meeting, you couldn't get them for about $3.50 is the cheapest I've seen. Anything with that spec rating. I'd make a motion to approve the proposed purchase of 100 HP Elite Desk 800 G1 refurbished computers from School Tech Supply at a cost of $24,800 to be funded through the technology referendum budget.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the proposed purchase of 100 HP Elite Desk 800 GI refurbished computers from School Tech Supply at a cost of $24,800 to be funded through the technology referendum budget. Can you
Is
have
there,
roll call, please?
with being refurbished, is there a warranty with it?
I believe there is, I don't know that for sure, but typically it does come with
Okay.
warranty, yes.
Okay.
The ones in the past have had a 1-year warranty.
How long?
1 year.
Okay.
Can you have roll call, please?
Mrs. Medina?
Yes.
Mr. Springs?
Yes.
Mrs. Royal?
Yes.
Mr. Bendel?
Yes.
Mrs. Head?
Yes.
I think it should be noted also, the reason we're doing this is because Windows 7 is no longer being supported by Microsoft, and the concern of malware and viruses on an unsupported operating system because you can't update it is the reason they have to be repurchased.
Okay. Update and reports, looks like there's, wow, a lot of meals, aren't we?
It's
I was
crazy.
surprised.
And it's increasing.
Attachment A is, provides that detail for you. Right now, we're averaging around 16,000 meals per week,
It's gone up every week.
8,000 breakfasts, 8,000 lunches, and we're still doing the 2-day-a-week, Monday, Thursday distribution. The Southwood County information indicated that as of a couple of weeks ago, there was over almost 100,000, almost 97,000, I should say, meals distributed in Southwood County alone from mid-March until a couple of weeks ago. That's insane. Of that, we're up to now about 16,000, and it has increased steadily between 2,000 and 1,000 to 2,000 meals each week. And as you see that info, Lizzie just reported, however, data's not in here, but just reported that this past week was about the same, so it looks as though we're planning out at this 16,000, 8,000 breakfast, 8,000 lunch sort of approach. We do intend to continue that through the month of June. We've been told that it is reimbursable by the FDA, so we're going to maintain that distribution for our families through June for sure. I'm inclined to think that if we can run summer school, we will have some kind of a meal service program like we have in the past in association with summer school, and that would be eligible for funding. That, remember, was at certain sites was just open-ended as well. You don't have to be part of summer school. If you're a kid, you can come and get free lunch or a snack or both. So we'll try to do that same thing. The linchpin is whether or not the federal funding or the reimbursement for providing these meals comes back. The reason behind that is because there isn't a magical tree of money or food that, well, a tree of food would, you know, you could have an apple tree, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't create our lunches, nor is there just free money to purchase the lunch materials. So without families buying them, which is a revenue stream, you know, the two don't add up. So as long as we have the federal reimbursements, as we are getting now, we should be just fine. And when you see the budget adjustment a little bit later in the meeting, you'll note on Fund 50 Food Service Fund that there is a little modification there, a downturn in their revenue with regard to what we're taking in. Because think a la carte, think the paid meals that we're not getting some revenue on, and although we don't make piles and piles of money on our food service program, it is self-sufficient and, you know, is able to be self-supporting. And that may not be the case. Well, it will not be the case for this year, but we may have to backfill, you know, in the future if there's some projects. Fund 10 backfill, that would be, if there's some Fund 50 projects that we want to accomplish. But yeah, and I also have to say, as long as we're on, you know, the television, as it were, our food service staff and the approach that it's been outstanding. Unbelievable, working super hard, smile on their face with their gloves and masks on. You can still see because their eyes are crinkled up that they're smiling. And it's been amazing. And I don't know if you've been by Lincoln when they're doing the pickups or drop-offs start at 11 o'clock. There is a line that goes all the way through the Lincoln parking lot and down the road. Just like if you were, I don't know, what the graduation was ending. That kind of traffic we're talking about waiting to come in and get the meals at the Lincoln site. The Meade site a little less, but still nonetheless busy from both ends coming in. And I've heard time and time again what a great resource it is for the community, and have told Lizzie and her people as much as possible that it's absolutely phenomenal, so.
Some good comes from it.
Absolutely.
All right, next item is Chromebook purchase.
And that's an update because this was alluded to, I think, last month, but we had them locked up or loaded up and we were ready to purchase them. The problem is that A, you can't get them, and B, the price is starting to take a climb, because keep in mind, most of this stuff is manufactured in China, or let's call it Asia in a general sense. And so access is becoming a problem, and then price is becoming a problem as well. So Phil asked for permission to place the order and then have it be provided to you as an update rather than waiting for board action to approve the purchase.
I think we should be looking in the future, putting them in 5th and 6th grade. I know at Stephen's point, 10-year-olds have them at home now.
Yeah.
Well, you know,
I
for their
agree.
work.
Yeah.
So I think it's something that has to be looked at sooner rather than later, for
Yeah.
especially those 2 grades.
At the elementary level in particular. So 6, 8, there is enough machines that each kid could have one issued to them.
Okay.
The reason we don't do that is because of the grade level. It's because kids, can be a little kooky in middle school. But we have enough infrastructure to make that happen. And we are working towards being more closely associated to one-to-one in upper elementary as well, so 4 or 5. As well as, K3, but they wouldn't get their own machine necessarily. So yeah, that's the goal.
Okay.
Okay, the next item is the FEMA reimbursement for the 2019 storm damage.
And I mentioned that to you as well in a board update, and we talked about it last month with regard to that skid steer purchase, because it was like 58 grand, and you were like, well, where are we gonna get that money from? And then we said, oh, lo and behold, we're getting 100,000 plus in FEMA dollars, so you can see them listed there for you. What the categories are, A, E, and Z. If pressed, I wouldn't have a clue to tell you what that means. FEMA language for what certain items are eligible under certain categories. And we have now recouped $126,564.93. So applause to Ed and his people, because initially it was, you may get nothing. Yeah, so, good deal there.
Okay, looks like everything for business services. We can move on to the personnel services. Looks like we have one professional staff retirement and one support staff early retirement.
That's correct.
Do you want me to motion, or should you go through it all?
Guess we could probably just motion one at a time.
I'll make a motion to approve the professional staff retirement request of Mary Schultz effective June 8th, 2020.
Second.
Motion a second to approve the professional staff retirement request of Mary Schultz effective June 8th, 2020. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And then I'll make a motion to approve the support staff early retirement request of Joseph Dunaj effective May 7th, 2020.
Second.
Motion a second to approve the support staff early retirement request of Joseph Dunaj effective May 7th, 2020. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries.
I move to approve the 16 professional staff appointments for the 2020-2021 school year.
Second.
A motion a second to approve the 16 professional staff appointments for the 2020-2021 school year. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And I'd like to make a motion to approve the professional staff resignation, the 2 resignation requests effective June 8th, 2020.
There's 4.
Is there 4?
Oh, wait, that's new business, never mind.
Yep.
Okay.
Mike,
That's
sorry.
okay.
You're adding some on?
Do we have a second?
Are they subject to any penalty for,
No, so Letha is leaving town, and she is just, her family's moving out of Wisconsin.
okay,
And the resignation at the end of the school year is not in violation of any
Okay.
of the contract liquidated damages.
okay,
And Chris's resignation is as a result of, he is moving into the AD position. And we figured that board action on a contract, a teacher contract resignation made sense to ensure that that contract was stopped. So
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the 2 professional staff resignation requests effective June 8th, 2020. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And I make a motion to approve the 1 support staff resignation effective June 5th, 2020.
Second.
Motion is second to approve the 1 support staff resignation request effective June 5th, 2020. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That's it for,
Well, we have the staffing update.
okay,
So the staffing update is so far 18 positions have been filled as of May 7th. We still have open 3 special ed jobs at Lincoln and Rams, a reading interventionist at River Cities, and an occupational therapist. That OT position and one of the Lincoln High School special ed positions are resignations that are going to be under new business. As far as an update for middle level AD, Tim Bean moved from his 6th grade math to Phi Ed / middle school AD. He's still on a teacher contract and will receive the same salary. He receives an additional stipend of $7,600 for the AD duties. So that's nothing new. He'll basically take over what Chris's position was. He does have to finish off some, I think, a class or 2 to polish off a certification, but he should be just fine to do what we've got him doing moving into next year. And a couple other possibilities that are circulating out there is the need for an additional speech and language pathologist. And the reason behind that is that we ran numbers in since 2016, our caseload for speech has increased 171%. And we have not modified or changed our speech staffing for several years, since well before 2016.
are we doing different testing that we show that kind of increase?
No, keep in mind that our special ed population has increased a pretty significant, and I shouldn't even say that, our population of kids receiving services has increased a pretty significant amount. I want to say we're looking at like even a 10 or 12% increase in that number, if I'm not mistaken. Speech is fairly, I mean, it's fairly common for kids to have some speech issues, particularly in early elementary school, that are rectified pretty quick. But our speech caseloads are significant. And so what I said to Danny was, okay, I'm curious to know how many of these kids are on monitor. So they're like 15 minutes a week, it's just a check-in, how are things going? And it's usually on the tail end of your IEP or of your services. And of the number, it was some ridiculous, it was like 21 of hundreds of kids. So I'm like, okay, well, that's not the problem. Because sometimes there's this apprehension around letting a kid out of the program, as it were, so that counts as a caseload number, but it can create artificially high numbers, and that's really not the case. It's just that there's that many kids that need speech. So that's a long-winded way of saying we have plans of potentially posting a speech language pathologist position, but you're going to hear me later talk about the 2021 budget update, and then you're going to say, why would you do that? So we're going to kind of wait and see what happens. The other thing that's out there is the current caseload of the special ed teacher at Grant is 29, and that is high. That's about 9 or more kids higher than everybody else's special ed caseload at that grade level. And so there is a need for an additional special ed teacher at Grant if you're talking just numbers. One of the things that's scary is that we have 3 special ed positions open currently, and we are not getting applicants. There's like 1 applicant for the Lincoln High School job and 0 for the Rams job. And those are just replacements, keep in mind. So I don't know what's going to happen here. And we also don't know why that's the case. Because if you notice, with the 16 or so that you approved just now, regular positions, it's like, yeah, I mean, they're coming in, we're posting, they're coming in, we're getting them hired, and things are going well. But we still are seeing this issue with special ed. So what I believe we'll do is we'll likely post the speech position and post the elementary special ed to serve at, it's a Grant Central Oaks Academy sort of position, and they may pick up additional responsibilities because 29.5 is a little bit low of a number. So it wouldn't be done just that easily, but something along those lines. And then what we'll see is if we get applicants, number one, and then number two, over that period of time, we hopefully learn more about what next year's budget, what kind of, reaming we're gonna get with regard to the state and some modifications to that, what they're going to implement, which means if you post a position, it doesn't mean you have to hire the position. And so we may have to make some decisions not to do what we should do in regards to staffing. So that's kind of the plan.
Could I ask you to repeat, I was zoning into the legislative update a little bit. Who did you say was the AD at Rams?
Bean,
Bean, okay.
Tim Bean.
Tim Bean, all right, thank you.
Did I call him Nick?
No, I
You
don't.
said Tim.
No,
Okay.
I didn't, I was looking at something here and then it's like, I think I just missed the name.
I knew a Nick Bean from like 20 years ago, which is why I could have said that. But yeah, Tim Bean.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That was all done by a Rams committee.
Yeah.
Yep. And Ryan. That's the staffing update.
Okay.
I'd just like to know, we don't have any policies this month. It's like the first time ever.
We're gonna try not to have policies anymore.
Okay, do we have any agenda referrals or information requests this month? So, hearing none, we can move on to the legislative agenda. John will be providing that this month.
All right, well, we've got several things. I'm just gonna read the highlights and then go into the grim reaper of the money part. First item is the U.S. Department of Education posted guidance on the CARES Act education funds. And our state unfortunately didn't act and lost somewhere between $25 and $30 million worth of these funds because they didn't act in time to make legislation to accept it, basically. There's two new reports on the highlight fiscal changes for the posted COVID-19, and I will get to those at the end. DPI is having a public hearing tomorrow on licensing changes for school pupil service professionals, including social workers. So that might be part of your, our shortage thing that they're looking at to try to help school districts find these people. OSS updates, seminars, or webinars, safety grant deadlines and new grant opportunities for the school safeties. Grants that have been on out. Secretary DeVos issued new Title IX rule on sexual misconduct allegations. Wisconsin schools surpassed 1 million meals served to students during the public health emergency, and this was as of May 6th. The state Supreme Court took up the case on the Republicans suing the governor over the safer home. We still have, that was on May 5th. We still have not had a ruling on that. Although Governor Evers today opened up strip malls and drive-in theaters to open. If you're a business in a regular mall and the only way to get to your business is through the mall, you still can't open. But if you're in like a strip mall, you can now open and follow the guidelines that like grocery stores and everybody else are following. DPI emergency rule will provide flexibility for summer 2020 online instruction. What the potential freeze in state spending could mean for school districts, that is the big thing based on tax collections. And then how likely is a state budget repair bill given the cost-cutting measurements announced by the governor yesterday. And those cost-cutting measurements were 15%, I believe, for all departments statewide. And what did I just do with my white paper? Okay, the two new reports, I'm just gonna highlight a couple parts out of this, is that tax collections in the month of April 2020 were 1.145 million. This is 870 million below collections of April 2019. For the 10 months of the current fiscal year, collections are 313 million below those over the same 10 months of the 2018-19 fiscal year. As recently as January, the LFB was estimating the gross balance of the state's general revenue at the current fiscal year of June 30, 2020 would be nearly 1.1 billion. That rosy forecast is largely going out the window. This week, the balance will undoubtedly decrease because of the reduced tax collections as shown in April report and the upcoming May and June reports. The extent of the effect of the collection Information will be known after the July 15th filing deadline for income and franchise taxes. However, amid the general gloomy outlook, there are some causes for limited optimism. As predicted, the $180 million transfer of the state's budget stabilization rainy day fund identified is likely to occur. The money will remain in the general fund, boosting the 2019-20 ending balance. Last week, the state required certain state agencies a lapse of 5% to general fund in the 2019-20 fiscal year. The move will save an estimated $70 million. The state's budget stabilization rainy day fund will have an estimated balance of $655 million at the end of the 2019-20 fiscal year. The state will receive $2 billion from the federal government under the CARES Act, although these funds must be used for expenditures made in response to the pandemic and cannot be used to replace state revenue shortfalls. Discussions are underway in Washington on legislation to modify this restriction and to make additional federal funds available that could be used to backfill state revenue shortfalls. And the only other thing is the WIA had, and I had talked to both Ron and Craig about that, they were talking about opening up July, a 1-month period for seniors, for teams, spring sport teams. However, with the current talks of July and the fact that they've already canceled Legion baseball all summer and all summer soccer programs have been canceled. So I doubt very highly if we could probably run a WIA program in the month of July. But that's out there. The Board of Control had put out guidelines to change that in case they were able to play. And what that would allow is that like a softball team could probably play a 1-month window from June 30th to July 31st, as long as 2 or more seniors are willing to play on that team. If they are not, then the coaches would be allowed additional contact, which would be 25 extra days with that team. And normally they only get 5 in the summer. So that's out there, but I don't think we're gonna probably be able to see it.
The Valley Conference has come out and said they're not scheduling anything.
It would be totally on the own of each coach if they were to do it, but it would still have to be approved by the school board and everything else if we're gonna do it all out. So with that, I think that's all we have.
Okay, thanks for the update, John. Move on to the bills.
Okay, I'd make a motion to note April 2020 receipts in the amount of $1,294,258.50 and approve April 2020 disbursements in the amount of $3,379,552.97.
Second.
We have a motion, a second, to note April 2020 receipts in the amount of $1,294,258.50 and approve April 2020 disbursements in the amount of $3,379,552.97. We have roll call, please, Marie?
Mrs. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Bembo?
Yes.
Mrs. Head?
Yes.
Mr. Crane?
Yes.
Mrs. Medina?
Yes.
Thank you, Maureen. We can move on to new business. Looks like the first item is possible action on employee appointment, resignation, and retirement requests.
That's correct. There's 2 professional staff resignations that you see there for you. The occupational therapist that we just hired this year is hanging up, taking a job. Has some family things transpiring, and is taking a job, I think, up in Wausau area. And then Keith Pup, who is the Lincoln High School special ed teacher, relatively recent hire too, as you can see, from 2018. And he, I believe, is headed back to like where he's from, kind of a deal.
I'd make a motion to approve the 2 professional staff resignations as printed.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the 2 professional staff resignations as printed. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
And I'd make a recommendation to approve the 1 professional staff appointment at Lincoln High School effective with the 2020-21 school year.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the 1 professional staff appointment at Lincoln High School effective with the 2020-21 school year. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Okay, next item, discussion and possible action to approve an individual appointment to fulfill summer school administrator duties, including compensation for the appointment, and to approve summer school site coordinator position, including proposed compensation for the position.
So if you're a policy committee representative, you recall, policy personnel, committee representative, you recall a conversation around a new summer school sort of approach that we want to use with respect to Tim Brown's resignation as the summer school administrator, and the fact that that provided us an opportunity to kind of reevaluate what that looked like. And so the motion or the request is twofold. One is to appoint Bill Oswald to serve as the summer school administrator. However, his compensation would not be what it was for Tim. It would be roughly 70% of that, about $7,000. And that there would be also the creation of a summer school site coordinator. And on this lavender sheet, there's a description, that outlines what that summer learning site coordinator would look like. And therefore, we would kind of tag team summer school with respect to an administrator and then a person that's kind of boots on the ground. They would have, the administrator would have more, development and program oversight responsibilities, reporting, the application process, blah, blah, blah. The site coordinator would be much more associated with the day in, day out activities with respect to what's happening in the classrooms and around the campuses and the facilities, transportation issues, parent communication, that kind of thing. So more of a boots on the ground sort of person. Bill, as the administrator, would still have those characteristics and traits, but you would spread that a little bit amongst those two people. There would not be any change then in compensation. So total, what we are currently paying to have a summer school administrator would not change. Moving to this model, it's split. The other thing that I'll just toss out there is we do have someone selected and earmarked to serve in the site coordinator position if it does get approved. However, they know that it may not happen this year because we might not have summer school. So it may be a foregone conclusion that nothing happens. And frankly, if we have an incredibly abbreviated season or things get really weird, we might not do anything with this person. But Bill has been transitioning with Tim for the last, since winter, really, since December, January. And he's been involved in a number of summer school conversations thus far. And that would be the primary go-to person. So.
I'd make a motion to approve the appointment of William Oswald to fulfill administrative summer school duties for a flexible period of time as needed to administer and provide overall oversight to the program, with compensation in the form of a $6,000 stipend, which will be paid at 50%, $3,000, in June to cover June duties, and 50%, $3,000 in July to cover July to December duties.
Second.
Motion to second to approve the appointment of William Oswald to fulfill administrator summer school duties for a flexible period of time as needed to administer and provide overall insight to the program, with compensation in the form of a $6,000 stipend, which will be paid at 50% in June to cover January through June duties and 50% in July to cover July through December duties. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, then I'd make a motion to approve the development of a summer school site coordinator position to assist the summer school administrator beginning with the 2020 summer school session. The individual hired will be compensated in the form of a $3,000 stipend to be paid at 50% or $1,500 at the conclusion of the first session, and 50%, which is $1,500, at the conclusion of the second session based upon the operation of a 6-week session.
Second.
Motion is second to approve the development of a summer school site coordinator position to assist the summer school administrator beginning with the 2020 summer school session. The individual hired will be compensated in the form of a $3,000 stipend to be paid at 50% at the conclusion of the first session and 50% at the conclusion of the second session based upon the operation of a 6-week session. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item C, consideration and possible action on the board's practice of memorializing deceased individuals.
Okay, that was my referral. If everybody read the information. I guess my question, when I talked to Maureen, I didn't realize how we did it. And when I saw that we have, the practice says it includes, let's see anymore, in the event of an accidental or illness-related death of an active employee, then it includes retired administrator, retired board member, or currently enrolled student. I guess I'm wondering about the retired administrator and the retired board member. but not I'm not really sure why, you know, it could be a lot of years before there could be a new board. I just am not really sure why the board would do it. I'm okay with it if you think that it should be there.
Well, I'd like flowers when I die. Just telling you.
Okay, also, if you go before me, I'll be sure and send you something. Because board members can still do it, but, you know, it's,
Well, I would think we could leave the retired, I agree with Mary, the retired part, probably we could scratch out because that would be your own choice then. I mean, if you
and that's
didn't
what I
know
was
who
gonna
they were,
say. You can still do it,
yeah,
or a group could do it if
Right.
somebody, you know, it's not that you wouldn't do it, but, you know, it doesn't include the retired staff and.
Well, I sometimes wonder too, when folks retire, they can move away, and we
Right.
recently had an administrator that passed that I don't think we even knew about till long after, that, you know, people hadn't stayed in contact. So, if you
The
retire
biggest
and move to
issue-
California, you may not know about it for a period of
Well,
time.
It's missing people.
Right,
That's the
exactly,
biggest issue.
and this way it's consistent, so, is a board member, you know, if one of us would be active, would we be considered an active employee, that we would be, or are we just
Well,
on here if we retired?
Can't it be that even if it's not like in a rule, like, or whatever you call it, policy, that we can, as a board, take up the idea to do that, or?
And that's what I wonder too, because there may be other times you'd wanna do that.
Right,
The motion more or less makes that the formal adoption of what the board
And then the board could
expects.
still,
And-
on their own, if,
Correct.
so I guess that was I mean, I don't have a problem, it just to me seemed, you know, to be kind of inconsistent, so. So I guess my recommendation would be just to take out the retired.
I'd make a motion to approve of altering the practice related to board memorials to send flowers for a memorial in the event of a death of an active employee or currently enrolled student or current board member.
Second that.
Okay, there's a motion, a second, to approve altering the practice related to board memorials to send flowers or a memorial in the event of a death of an active employee, currently enrolled student, or current board member. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, item
You
D.
know, we sent something to Tim Latch and got that big.
yeah, but we could
Well,
discuss
you know,
that.
I
Yeah.
just,
That it doesn't require it, I mean,
I know, I'm just,
It's all right, doesn't bother me.
No.
No.
Any more discussion anybody wants to have? I mean, I understand it. I
Right, and
guess when Mary and I talked a little bit, I just thought about, you know, when Dr. Chris passed, we didn't even know he passed for a period of time. I'm sure we would have taken up a collection had we been aware of it. So it's like, and that what kind of made me think about, well, what about when administrators or board members retire and move away, and, you know, it seems like you'd want it to be consistent, so.
Right.
One thing that I just want to add is Craig does put in also, so it's usually from the board and superintendent, so he does.
Oh,
Okay.
that's nice.
I'm picky though. I'll be like, no, not this time.
Maureen, you yeah, you know.
It's for Sandy? No.
I'm gonna take notes.
Okay, the next item, discussion and possible action to approve the implementation of alternative deadlines associated with processing 2020-21 open enrollment applications in accordance with modifications as specified in Wisconsin Act 185.
And that's self-explanatory, so I'll be brief. Due to the pandemic, they modified the timelines. That's part of what's outlined in Wisconsin Act 185 for open enrollment applications, processing, and so forth. And of course, we would prefer to follow the modified timelines, which have some impact on policy, which is why the request is here before you.
make a motion to approve the implementation of alternative deadlines associated with processing 2020-2021 open enrollment applications in accordance with modifications as specified in Wisconsin Act 185. In lieu of those set out in Board Policy 423, Public School Open Enrollment, and 423 Rule Procedures for Processing Public School Open Enrollment Applications.
Second.
We have a motion, a second, to approve the implementation of alternative deadlines associated with processing 2020-21 open enrollment applications in accordance with modifications as specified in Wisconsin Act 185 in lieu of those set out in Board Policy 423, Public School Open Enrollment, and 423 Rule Procedures for Processing Public School Open Enrollment Applications. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item, discussion and possible action to approve an amendment to the Lamers bus contract relative to continued compensation for the bus company during the COVID-19 shutdown.
Just what you wanted. Was more bus contractor amendment conversation. So it's fairly straightforward this time around. We've got the blue and we've got the yellow. And the blue was the last iteration, or very similar to the last iteration that you saw. Okay, and it would be what you would have approved, and if Lamers would have said, I'm in, I'll sign it, we wouldn't have been kicking this can again. But here we are, and I want to outline a couple of changes, and then I'm going to also indicate why I think it's an okay compromise, as it were, to move forward and have this behind us. So in comparing, the blue to the yellow, or gold, what color is that? Goldenrod, I bet.
Yeah.
See? Yeah, all right.
Nice.
In comparing the blue to the goldenrod, first page, item E is removed. And so in the new version, there is no item E. This articulates, and this has some deference to what's removed later too, this articulates the development of this pro rata share, or this prorated share of their terminal expenses, which was part of one of the sticking points. And the reason why I would sit here before you and say I think it's okay in this regard is twofold. Lamers is a significantly larger company than Safeway, meaning they are geographically larger. They're all throughout the state of Wisconsin, in addition to some other areas. And by virtue of that, what they indicated was we're not going to go down to the nuance of spelling out and pairing out all of these costs associated with just the Wisconsin Rapids terminal, because it would be 1/132nd of, you see what I'm saying? And he said, how about we do this? And that's this yellow sheet for you, where this total daily rate has been calculated. And what they do answers this question preemptively, but not necessarily by providing us this prorated share, okay? And the reason it answers this question directly is because what they're saying is, in your $2,153 per day cost, you are paying as follows, and it's listed there for you. Lock, stock, and barrel, 100%, that's what we're paying for. Which is why they're saying, that's why we don't need to do that calculation. And I said, okay, I mean, I get it. That, to me, that makes sense in your circumstance. And by the way, as you can see, this is much less than what they could say they're looking for from us with regard to our portion of the cost for the WR terminal. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But in my opinion, we're getting the information we want because it's detailed, and they're saying this is exactly what it's going to be each payment, each time. Fine. Fast forward to the rest, where the part that is imperative that they get covered is under item A, so that is 2A. Now I'm on page 2. That remains in its entirety. That very long paragraph around saying, hey, here's how you have to use the funds, and hey, by the way, later on in there too, we want to be able to ask you for proof and evidence of the fact, or ask for an independent accounting of said documents or financials, and we would get it. So that's retained here. But what else has changed is item G, and it's G on the blue, and it's G on the goldenrod, and it says accounting of payments. The G on the goldenrod is much shorter, because once again, it's modified to exclude the prorated share language that was removed when E was removed. However, it does give us unilateral ability to say, I want documentation, and I want to be able to have the ability to inspect that and call for an independent audit if necessary.
So what would trigger that call? Because then when I was reading this, a thought came to mind is, with both of the busing companies now, there's these CARE Act dollars.
Right.
What would trigger us to say that we were requesting an audit? I mean, is there something in that language in the CARES Act that says these monies are spent towards transportation, or don't we know that yet?
We still don't know that yet, but what we do know is that the language around you should pay your contractors as reasonably practicable does exist. Okay, so it behooves us, I think, to do that in some capacity, as long as we know we're protected for doing so. The biggest rub, which is what is covered by these amendments, the one that Safeway signed, the Lamers one, and all the iterations in between, are the fact that, A, we have the ability to ask those sorts of questions, John, because under normal circumstances with contractors, as I'm sure you know, they say, here's the cost for the service we're gonna provide, and we pay it. We don't say, I wanna see, you don't have that ability, right? What did you spend on fuel? How much is in personnel? You don't have that ability. The CARES Act, though, is very explicit with regard to eligibility around bringing people back or using the dollars to pay for payroll and that sort of thing. And one of the aspects of the implementation of the CARES Act was thinking about government employers, school districts, cities, municipalities, as part of these stimulus dollars to say, keep your people on the payroll. Don't force them to the unemployment, thank you, system, because you have the public dollars already, which is what these stimulus CARES Act dollars are. And oh, by the way, contractors. Now, to be very direct, there could be some point in the future, what this amendment protects us from, where the CARES Act is very specific and says, no, you're supposed to pay 100%, which then we'd make them whole. Or the contrary could be, hold up, we gave them payroll relief, which means you should roll that off of and they pay us back some portion. We don't know that yet. And according to our attorney, and the legal advice that you've seen, as it stood back when this happened, the prevailing legal advice was hold off, just relax, don't do anything. And then over a period of time, my thought process was, fine, makes sense, nobody's losing their mind quite yet, we should figure out what the heck's going on here. But we didn't learn anything more about the CARES Act dollars, and as you realize, the state lost out, because they didn't get around the table soon, okay, blah, blah, blah. And so we may not find that this is completely rationalized and spelled out for us, and we might find that nothing. We might know whether we did it right or wrong, we might not know anything. But, to circle back to really what you're asking, why would we do that? Well, let's say, hey, what's going on now? Safeway's going out of business? How would that be? Where did our money go then that we sent them? Well, because of this interim period, we'd have some ability to look at this, or Lamers, where in the past, that wouldn't be a question that we could really ask. Hey, private contractors, show us where you're putting our money. Well, it's none of your business. It's our money once you give it to us, because we're providing, if we provide the service, you provide the money for the service. You know what I'm saying? So really, that's what it comes down to. And we may, the opportunity to rectify would present itself via this
Are there any provisions that we're aware of in the CARES Act that the federal government directly is paying contractors?
No,
Okay.
they would be in terms of this payroll.
The PPP money.
Yeah, PPP money, payroll protection plan.
Yeah.
But that may mean that they have to pay that back, or that may mean that our payment can't go towards personnel. But on the front end, it says that it should. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So there's a number of these things that have to be rectified. And what I would ask that question, frankly, would be because I've heard something. Oh, interesting. So that means, we would need to do an inquiry. And frankly, the way it stands now, Lamers and Safeway work with a number of other districts. So it's really not just us that we're worried about here. It's a statewide thing, or even potentially a nationwide thing. And we're all gonna hear some things, you know what I mean? So do I anticipate making that request? Honestly, no, I don't. I wouldn't be stunned if we get an invoice and send the payment, and we happily roll along and there's no questions asked. But if something comes out like, oh, CARES Act dollars for transportation contractors, blah, 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 well, yeah, we're gonna look into that and might have to ask some questions. But we have good relationships with both Lamers and Safeway too. I expect the phone to ring and they'd go, hey, we received $100,000 and blah, 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 so we have to give you, great, let's figure out how we're gonna do that, so.
The only other audit part of thing is if our auditor comes to
That's
us
the-
and says, hey, we need to go check with them, and that would be the other.
That's
part.
a broader problem that private contractors don't typically have to be concerned about, which is, if we're making a payment for something we're not getting, why are you doing that? And what's your rational basis for doing so? That's why we've got this. The question of why would some school districts just jump and go ahead and do that? I don't know. I don't work there, I don't really care what they're doing. I don't think it was wise, but it is what it is. But yeah, that's the broader question. And I don't know and that's a great point, because when auditing takes place, because of these CARES Act dollars, which, by the way, the preliminary information indicates that we have until 2022 to spend these dollars. till 2022, distributed via the Title I formula. And you guys, you all been board members long enough to know that auditors come in and they'll have a certain slice that they're looking at that year. Oh, you're really gonna look at summer school, or really double check Fund 80. Well, you know they're gonna say something about CARES Act dollars at some point in the future. And next year, or for this year, might be, well, we didn't spend any CARES Act dollars, we're gonna spend them all in next year. So then our audit wouldn't be reflective of that for another 12 months plus, you know what I'm saying? But it's going to get interesting, and we have no idea what questions they're gonna ask. We have zero idea. Well, how'd you spend these CARES Act dollars? Well, we bought this, this, and this. Well, those aren't eligible. Well, it said they were eligible. Well, no, they're not. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, this whole thing is gonna be as interesting can be. All right, sorry I got long with it, but
That's all right.
it's entertaining.
With that, I'd make a motion to approve the amendment to the Lamers bus contract dated May 11th, 2020, relative to continued compensation for the bus company during the COVID-19 shutdown.
Second.
We have motion and second to approve an amendment to the Lamers bus contract dated May 11, 2020, relative to continued compensation for the bus company during the COVID-19 shutdown. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, item F, discussion and possible action to amend the 2019-20 district budget.
Okay, hold on to your socks, folks. Dan got this hot off the presses at 5:35 maybe? I left for the Park and Rec Commission meeting with what I thought was a final copy and returned, and there was 2 iterations from the time that I returned to the time we had the board meeting. So, here you go. And what I'll tell you too is that you're going to have something before you, likely in June as well. What's that?
452.
Well, there you go. You'll have something in June as well, meaning there'll be another budget amendment come June. So when he said that to me, the first question out of my mouth was, why are we doing it now then? And the reason behind that, and I think what's important about this, is that DPI utilizes the information that we have in their system at points in time to cast forward our budget for next year. So there's certain times where it behooves us to make these budget amendments, let's call it preemptively or a little bit early, so that he has the authority to then to update our budget numbers in said portal, giving DPI the most accurate picture of where WRPS is at that time. Does that make sense? And that is right around the corner when they're gonna look initially. Keep in mind that dictates, the amount of state aid we receive and so forth and so on. So it does make sense to have your numbers updated. So there's 2 different sheets. The sheet that you have to approve is printed, is this gray sheet, and it looks like this. So that's primarily what you're looking at. And what he has done is identified or adjusted a couple of columns, or a couple of cells, let's call it, that would stand out. So one of the questions you might have is for undifferentiated curriculum, the change of 257.62. Well, the change is because of grants, a salary adjustment, and some new hires that transpired prior to the budget being set, or pardon me, after the budget being set. So that's fairly easily explained. It's also not a gigantic number with respect to our overall budget. You're also going to notice under insurance and judgments, in addition to $45,400, that's for unemployment comp, not a massive change. We do not have a high number, Sandy asked for that data, which was a great choice. As you saw from that data, we do not have a high number of employed staff seeking unemployment. What we have is formerly employed staff seeking unemployment, and we are a direct pay entity. So when somebody gets unemployment, we pay. We don't pay unemployment insurance as a public school district. So that's why he seeded those dollars there. Unemployment is up for us, but not to a huge degree, which is good news. And then what you're going to find most of this is accumulated in is item called Business Administration, 2,500 there, 552,703. And that's where this lovely pink handout comes in, and we'll describe some of those changes in more detail. So where is that $500,000 coming from, or that modification? Well, here's the way Dan explained it to me, and I'm going to do my best. And if you have questions, I'm going to do my best to answer them too, but we may have to seek some clarity from Dan if that's necessary. In 1819, the budget listed there, 12 million and some change, was what was on the books for 1819. We had things like hail damage, the rest, so now I'm underneath it, the projects, school safety grants 1 and 2, lighting, the big $2 million lighting project, the pool. So you see those things listed there, and that comes to a total of $3,414 of projects completed. And you would say, why is that there? Because that should roll off the $12 million overall budget to cast forward our budget for 1920. Is that making sense? You following me so far? But what we find is that when Dan rolled off that amount, the amount that was rolled down to, the $8,267,000, was not enough to accommodate for the things that were also included in this year's budget that weren't necessarily part of the grand scheme or part of the plan. Because the way Dan's budgeting mind works is to say, okay, we budgeted $12,275,000 last year. There is $3,414,000 of projects we're not going to do again or not going to expend. I'll take that out. Here's a new budget. Boom, there it is. So then you have to rectify, why do we need that extra $500,000, that $552,703? And that's what he does down below under the 1920 where it says projects. Safety grant 1, safety grant 2, truck, a skid steer, Rams track, LHS Fab Lab, and dump trailer. And if you total those things up, it comes and adds to the total additional expenditures that weren't necessarily included in this year's facilities budget, but have been expended. That doesn't mean we don't have revenue to take that into account. It just means that it wasn't part of his planned expenditures, which is really the rational basis for why the 552 is included there, among all the other things that we're doing. Is that making sense? And then if you look at the other stuff, so there's other pages to this amendment. Most of the other modifications are minor, and Dan has a very brief description there. So you'll see under debt service fund, defeasance. Under the capital projects fund 46 sinking fund, you'll see that 43.4 was for that LHS athletic complex site prep and plans. RLE renovations, that's the revenue limit exemption renovations under capital projects fund. And then the other thing that, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, here, food service fund, you see a modification there. That's an anticipated revenue issue for the reasons that I described, because we haven't had school for a handful of months, and we won't have that revenue in food service. So in general, that's the budget amendment you're being asked to approve this evening, knowing that there will be yet another budget amendment come closer to the end of the fiscal year. And Dan said most likely it'll be at our annual meeting budget hearing sort of time frame, which is the end of June.
When I look at July 1, 2019, and we had an estimate of $20,000 for the renovation of the Fab Lab, and now we're doubled that to $40,700. What?
He didn't go into details with me on that, but I'm willing to bet it has to do with matching grant dollars as part of our Fab Lab grant. Okay. So in order to get access to those grants, there's a 50% match that the district has to undertake.
Okay.
So that was part of it, and the other part of it was some modifications to that facility to make it functional Fab Lab, because in order to be eligible for the grant too, you can't just say, hey, welcome to our Fab Lab, and you go to this room and then you go across the building, you see what I'm saying? So.
Okay. Other towns don't, some of the big manufacturers support Fab Labs?
Yes,
That's what I thought.
absolutely. Yeah, you might see, the donation of a pretty pricey CNC machine as an example, yeah. And like I said too, the key is that we're not just talking expenditures, and this is new dollars, because there is revenue in the terms of the FEMA dollars, for example, and the safety grant dollars that we have coming in. So it's not as though this is all negative. The expenditures are what's important to update with regard to our budget, but there is some, let's call it unanticipated revenues that will take that down a notch as well.
When we're looking at this July 1, 2019, where these things are like 1 and 2s, are those going to be re-looked at to maybe make a 1 or 2 or vice versa? I'm looking at carpet replacement.
You only have that because
Oh.
you had asked for it. You only have that.
Oh, okay, okay,
What you're looking at, Sandy, is the facilities plan?
yeah,
Yeah. So that's absolutely a fluid document.
okay,
And what ends up happening is we strike when the iron's hot
Okay.
on certain occasions. Because one of the things that you'll see is well, it's not on here, but there was some modifications and some changes over at Grant as an example.
Okay,
Silly things like urinals and I don't know, a couple of other items, that turned out to be pretty high buck stuff.
okay,
But sometimes it has to do with an immediate need, like 2 out of the 3 urinals stop flushing. Okay, so now we gotta do that. And other times it has to do with timing. It's just the right time to do it because a contractor calls you up and says, hey, we can come next month, or yep, absolutely, get in, get it done, kind of an approach. Yes,
Okay, I'd make a motion to approve, to amend the 2019-20 district budget as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve, to amend the 2019-20 district budget as presented. Roll call.
Mr. Kreis,
Yes.
Mrs. Hack,
yes.
Mr. Bendel,
Yes.
Mrs. Medina,
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds.
Yes.
Thank you, Maureen.
The other, one other part that Craig didn't really know is the reason Dan had to add some of that in, because of the under-report the budget, that costs you,
yeah,
cost you in the fund revenue.
that was the update to DPI.
Okay, there is a item G under new business, update and discuss the 2020-21 budget. I think we just did that. So looking at the calendar, May, it looks like we're going to continue to only have one meeting on the 11th. That's today, okay. Moving forward to June, we show that we have committee meetings and board meeting. I guess we'll have to see the direction that happens between now and June, whether or not we have one meeting or two.
We'll be in touch. And I just want to jump in and say, the 1920 budget was the amendment, and just as an update for the 2021 budget, because typically by this stage of the year, you would have seen a budget iteration or two, and in fact, there might have even been a preemptive or preliminary approval. You're not going to see that, and in fact, you're not going to hear much for a little bit here because there's a strong possibility that the budget is going to change in a negative fashion. And in the short term, this modification that the governor instituted with the department heads does not impact any dollars that have been promised to schools for this year. So we don't anticipate any modifications to revenues or expenditures significant for this year. But next year, we're running several different budget scenarios, which is what I alluded to earlier with regard to this SOP position and maybe another speech or special ed elementary teacher. Because there's a good possibility that what's going to happen is that the legislature will convene and do a budget repair bill, and then what we'll have is a budget that basically is flat. So whatever we have this year is what we're going to get next. Keep in mind that's significant, and it's significant because next year's budget special ed reimbursement was supposed to go from 26% to 30%. That's a good chunk of change, so that would be off the table. And we were supposed to get, I think the number is 179 per pupil under the cap, or we'd retain the 179 per pupil under the cap and get an additional 50. Maybe that's what it was. But we would lose that. And that's a pretty significant dollar amount too. So knowing that things like insurance and things like services and things like, the cost of doing business goes up steadily every year, 2 to 3%, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, depending. And if we stay flat, you know what that means. And so we'll know more when we know more, and you guys will be the first people to know once we're hearing. But as it stands right now, that's our budget prediction for next year, which is pretty significantly different than what we had originally anticipated. In terms of dollars and cents, when we're prepared to give you something that's actionable or reasonable, you'll know what that means. I just wanted to give you that heads up. I didn't want you thinking, why aren't we talking about budget? And I also didn't want you to think the sky's falling when you hear the rhetoric out of the Capitol. I know that we're going to get hosed, but to what degree is really what the question mark is. So more to come on that.
Okay. And I do see that we have the trade homes tour in June, and I'm assuming if we only have one meeting, then that would be that night. We wouldn't have the trade homes tour 1 week and then the board meeting the next, would we?
Probably not, and in fact, we may, with the trades home tour, we could probably do social distancing and be okay with that. And I think what we'll do is if we make modifications to June, that'll probably be a conversation that we reach out to you guys on. But it makes sense to me that we do it prior to the regular board meeting then. I mean, as long as you guys have the night set aside, right? Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I guess with that, then we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.